Um, so thanks for dealing with me on Thursday. Man, I was
What?
no. I know. I'm just saying it's like I feel a little bad, but I think what
Well, you should.
I know. I'm a very, very bad person.
You're bad. You're you're a bad person.
um no, I didn't I didn't really after our call, I had a moment where I was able to just kind of some let something kind of dawn in conscious awareness that was kind of just happening on like a kind of a more subconscious level, I think. And it was um it was like, oh, what I realized was like um up to this point, my a big part, like my my why for to be silent, part of it anyway, part of the driving motivating factor, whatever. I mean, there's many, but um part of it was just in some ways, like there was definitely like a scarcity aspect to it. Like I don't think I can just um paint to um like I'm not good enough, to just paint and do that well. I'm not saying this is all of it. I'm just saying like part of it, and because there's a lot of reasons for wanting to do this, um, but another reason was like just coming from a, basic, just wanting to do something good, because I felt, so lacking, or something like that. Like, um, and in some ways there was like some degree of like neediness for it to work or be successful or whatever, like so that I could like feel good about what I was doing, or something like that. Like
Sure.
and and so yesterday I kind of realized that like I'm at the point um where I think you've been more or less from the beginning. Which is like, I don't care. It's like you were, it's like you were saying about, it's like you always say about working with your patients in the clinic. Like one of the things that makes you a good healer is that you're not attached to whether or not they get better. Like you're not like emotion, like emotionally invested in like needing them to heal. Like there's that, it's neutral, right? Doesn't matter. And I always felt like with To Be Silent when we were working on it, like I wanted to go and I wanted to do, and I want to, like, whatever, but you just seem like so neutral, like, like why? Oh, it's weird. It's like I genuinely, I think, feel, and there's almost like a loss component to it too, like a sense of like not like almost just like a loss of a part of the self, like just that's like kind of not there anymore. Like you're just kind of like realizing like, oh, I'm not, like it's actually okay either way. Like,
Yeah, because if it doesn't just come from your own, like we all have to do this, right? And it's become something that, I think, in some ways our culture is missing in certain aspects, in general, that the idea of, and this is one of those ones that's tough to balance, but from our perspective we constantly have to go from it. Like we're constantly, look, we're not perfect, and we're constantly trying to as we're doing these things, or we set something else, set something up for us to do for somebody else. So that idea of, that I was always trying to teach this to the Four Winds people, right? But it just doesn't go over because or it didn't to a lot of them, because on the other side, the organization was pushing so much to be of service too early in my idea, right? How can you be of service if you can't get yourself to where you want to be? Well, that means that you're making your service dependent on, you're making your service a major part of, who you, how do I put this? It's almost like they were making service as something that you should be doing, for some kind of altruistic reason.
Right.
And I think that that's false. That's a false premise right from the beginning. It's like it always has to come from, your service has to come from, how does it make you feel first? Right? Like, do you want to be of service? And if so, you have to acknowledge that makes you feel good to be of service in whatever aspect that service takes, right? Like, I do my healing practice not just to keep a roof over my head. That's a part of it. But if I didn't like the way that healing service made me feel personally, then it has no legs, because then it just becomes another thing that you do for a certain purpose, and only a certain purpose. Like, that's when, whatever you do becomes a job, as opposed to just an outcropping of something that you are. And it sounds like I'm splitting hairs, but I'm not. It's like, that one of those curmudgeonly teachers that I had, and he got so much controversy over this. And I didn't, again, I heard it, the first time I heard it, I was very young and I couldn't comprehend, I could acknowledge what he was saying, but I couldn't comprehend it really in my core, right? Because what I had at that time was in no way, what I was training to be was in no way in my head was, I didn't have a service idea at the time, right? I didn't have that idea in my head. It was just that I really enjoyed doing it. So it was for me. And, and he would say, and he would always use and he was not Christian, right? But he would always use the analogy of like Mother Teresa, and everybody would be like, oh, shocked, because, supposedly, we all idealize, or a lot of people idealize her as like the most selfless, saintly, doing all this stuff for the poor, and being in a place of poverty, and constantly giving of herself to everybody else except her, and and offering that all up as some kind of, sacrifice to God, or doing his will or work or whatever. And his argument was, but even if in the beginning, if she didn't like it, she wouldn't do it. And so everybody misses that aspect, right? Like, there has to be some level of enjoyment in what you do for yourself. And if you don't start from that premise, that thing has no legs. And you can deny it and virtue signal all you want, but it's true, right? When we get down to brass tacks, you love painting because you love painting. You like the experience. It's good for you. You enjoy probably 90% of the aspects of painting, if not more, right? It's for you. And because you're so enveloped in that, that just naturally radiates out, obviously, into your paintings. And obviously, the energy of that, I mean, we don't even have to get into the woo-woo aspect of it, right? That alone generates this dynamic for everyone around you. And that, there's attenuation there. I mean, the more that you do it, the more that the farther that resonation goes out, the farther that frequency hits other people. Regardless, there's no space or time or any of that stuff, right? It just keeps going.
Yeah.
And you're compounding it and making it more and more. And so, and then when people say, wow, that's really beautiful, Dustin, it's like, that makes you feel better. Does it make you feel better? There's an aspect of it that, like, oh, you're getting a compliment, but it's in some ways it's affirming your love for what you do, and you're compounding that's the experience, and you're putting that back into it again, and you're and it can go awry, and you can be like judging yourself. That's the negative aspect of that, or like keeping it to a higher ideal. That would probably be the better aspect of that, but not in a bashing way, like, oh man, I haven't written another book in so long, or I haven't made a really great painting in so long, I got to get, like, oh, everybody's going to be disappointed in me, but so it becomes this perverted thing, right? And you lose the joy out of it, because now it's just being done for the sake of survival, right? Or
Yeah.
like your expectations of other people to you. So, but at the core of anything that you do, there has to be some, enjoyment of that thing, right? It's like, I've seen this, through my own experiences, through my teachers' experiences, through my students' experiences. Those people who really, really do well in what they do, and that comes about almost, that their success in that territory almost comes about as a consequence of them really enjoying what they do for their own sake. There's an element of that. And if that's not there, it's just like asking, for the what without a why, right?
Yeah. And I think,
That's the end of it, right?
and
It's like, and so we have to be neutral in holding, whether it goes or it doesn't go, it doesn't matter, because I still enjoy doing it. I still think that I'm offering it out there to whoever wants it. If they don't want it, it doesn't affect me. I'm still going to do it. If it does affect them, wonderful, little added bonus, right? But I'm still going to do it. And so but it has to be at the heart, the core of who you are, to acknowledge that you love doing this, and you would do it regardless if anybody ever gave you a compliment on it, or anybody. Like, I've had a few, let's not call them friends, let's call them friendly acquaintances, that you could tell they loved what they were doing. Now, it's not something that I had any interest in or whatever, but I enjoy the fact that they enjoy it so much that it's become part of them, and they would do it regardless if anybody knew it or not. And they, you ask them about it and they just light up, right? And it's like,
yeah. And
and that's the thing. It's like, it's coming from the place of their, they get really good at it, because it really is coming from that core of like, man, and if I could, and forget about if you could do it as a job, or you could do it as a career, or you could do it as whatever. It's like, it's part of you, and it feeds that deepest part of you. And so, when you have that, it's easy to be more neutral. And I
yeah.
think that in that neutrality, again, we bring that unity. And of course, all these things happen best in that state of unity, right? Where our thoughts, our words, and our deeds are all in alignment, right? They're integral. And so, and that makes the structure really solid. And so, and because of that, and because you're just compounding that I think that that makes it resonate out, with a direct, in a more of a direction of where you would like it to go. But if it doesn't go that way, well, it's still, I'm just doubling down on my own, the thing that motivates me the most, right? Um, my, the thing that generates the most meaning in my life.
Yeah. I mean, I think I realized too that like you can't, like, I always thought we need to do a good enough job making this program, and we need to do everything so perfectly and like selling it and marketing it and act, and obviously the product, like, and obviously it's just in our nature to like do things the best that we can do. We do our best whatever we do, whatever we bring ourselves to. But I felt this almost, it's never good enough feeling, I think, stemming to some degree from thinking that if if we made it more perfect somehow, it would we would magically transform other people's lives, and we would be responsible for that in a positive way, and that would make me feel good. And and i and that's the and I think that that's part of the, it's one thing to take responsibility for yourself, but um I think I had almost an over expression of responsibility, like a misplaced expression of responsibility. And as I've like withdrawn that back into myself, realizing like, you know, everybody has to do this for themselves. Like, I can't do it for anybody else. Doesn't matter how
No,
good our program is. It doesn't matter how good a guided meditation is, even. Like, people still have to do it for themselves. So, um, I think I think part of what's happening for me is I'm just like readjusting to having a different awareness of, and a clearer and cleaner motivating factor for doing this. And it's like you said, like, I think more my motivating factor for doing it now is like, I really love talking about these things. I love talking to you. I love the experiences that I'm having, and I love having an outlet for like expressing that and sharing that. And if other people like enjoy it and get something out of it and are able to apply it for themselves, that's cool. But like, that I'm like, I know that like that's up to them. Like, I can't I can't
I
do it.
mean, if we were evaluating on that level, it's like you can easily, I don't even want to say justify, but I don't have a better word for it. Like when you get into that, like anytime I get, let's say before I had that attitude adjustment for myself, it's like, um, I remember back, um, we're talking decades ago now, that, I remember him relating this story to me that if a teacher of something of like this, but I would say with anything, right? If a teacher gets, you know, one student in their lifetime that they can pass on a complete system of knowledge and experience that they've had, not experience, but like the rendition of their experiences and their understanding of what they're doing. And they can pass it on to one person, even one that can, take that, and it cuts the learning curve down and hopefully even go beyond where the teacher was, or at least continuing the whole system forward. Um, well, then they were considered extremely lucky. To have two or three was like unheard of. Of course, we're talking, a more, in that context, a much more condensed, population structure, and it almost captured, right? So, like in a monastic situation, it wasn't like every master in the temple saw every single student at the same, with the same amount of time and whatever, right? It was like they would eventually, certain ones would be in the territory that they thought they could help them even more, and so they became their apprentices or whatever. But it was all with that idea of, and even the apprentices, they didn't all finish, they didn't all follow through, they didn't all achieve that level. But if you even got one, that was considered incredibly fortunate, right? And so, and when we think about it, I mean, when I thought about that, I was like, oh, that, but you have more students than that. And he was like, well, not really. If I really condense it down to what I'm actually thinking, he goes, I'm extremely fortunate in that I have, at that time, it was like 3. And out of the 3 apprentices, only 2 continued, one sort of petered out a while after that. And then, eventually it was down to 1. And so, it doesn't even happen in those very tight organizations, if you want to call it that, right? So, but even at that, it's like, when you think about it, that if you have 1, that's 100% increase from you. You double that, that's 100%, right? So if you end up with 2, so then I started thinking about it, and like, how many people could I actually say, not only have I, whatever level I've passed this information on, that it improved their life to at least the level that I think my life is at, and these become very, becomes very individualized at that point. But let's say that their spirituality and their health and their success and their relationships were much, much better after, putting themselves in those positions to learn that material and apply it in a good way. I could say I'm like super blessed because there's at least, I don't even know, I've lost count, but let's say if I were saying that whole, where they got the whole enchilada, that it was like, there might be 20, 25 people that have done that, and it's like, do the percentages. That's huge, right? That's huge. So for me, it's like, and that's pretty successful. So I always felt like on that service end, I've already gone above and beyond what most traditional teachers would have done, and I don't think it's because I'm better or a great teacher in any way, other than being able to translate things that are inherently difficult to translate, and into language that is accessible by our culture. And that's it. And I did that primarily through back and forth with them, right? Like, they would feel comfortable enough to question me on details and how I thought about these things. And a lot of that stuff, it's like, I don't think to, we've had these discussions before. I don't think to, it's some of these things, it's, I'm thinking primarily in a, kind of a mind mapping way, rather than a didactic linear fashion of putting things together as a system, right? And there is part of that. Obviously, there's a method, but a lot of things are nuanced, right? And so they don't come out unless somebody asks the question. Because from how would I know from their perspective even what their question's going to be about some little aspect that I do automatically, that I've forgotten that I even do that? It's like, I can't even tell you how many times a question spurred me to think about how I do certain things or how I think about certain things in order to make it work for me. I mean, you know, it's just it's part of it, you know, and but that's also, I find it extremely valuable. So that's valuable to me as well. It's not just service to them, but that being asked those questions makes me think about how I think about these things in order to make them come to fruition in my life. And if I can get them through some physical analogy or some common language, and break it down. I mean, how many times have we talked about some little tiny point that you had a question about, and we spent hours kind of dissecting it and, you know, disassembling it and then putting it back together in a way that you finally went like, like, oh, I got it. You know, like that's very cool. And it's cool for me as well, right? I mean, that's like, and I don't have to have it, but isn't that, does it make me feel good? Of course it makes me feel good. It makes me feel good because, you know, I feel like I helped somebody that I really like, and they got it, and now they're going to take it and they're going to do something with it, and maybe that's the thing that just blows them open and everything starts to come from them. We don't know the nuances that are going to line everything up, and then, you know, as he would say, you know, it's like the little signal that hits that blasting cap that, you know, you've accumulated this giant explosive, and finally, you know, and you're trying, nothing works, and then all of a sudden this one little signal, you know, just makes it, you know, the little emoji with the head popping off, you know. And you know, I mean, this is the thing. So but if I didn't enjoy doing that, believe me, I'd be a hermit, you know. I wouldn't, you know, I mean, it's not like I'd send people away, but at the same time, if I didn't enjoy explaining myself or explaining little minuscule aspects of what we do, or what, you know, a certain procedure or a certain thing, or how to think about the world, or, you know, how to even think about thinking about the world, right? It's like, then I wouldn't do it. I mean, it would have no draw for me. You know, so we have to at least admit to ourselves that what we do first and foremost because we enjoy doing it. And there's nothing wrong with that. And that idea, that dichotomy of service, is that you do for somebody else, even if you don't like what it is, that you don't enjoy it, you don't want to, no, that there's no legs there. You cannot, that cannot be supported for any length of time, you know. And that's how you find out, you know, what, you know, what are the things that drive you? What gives you meaning in your life? Because when it gives you meaning, it takes on a whole different flow for you, right? And that obviously resonates out, right? It's just, it's one of those things. And I think it's something that, you know, like, I'm happy you said, you know, that you said that, but I think that that's where that's coming from. You know, it's like, you
Happy
know,
I said what?
well, just like the revelation that you had after Thursday or whatever, you know, like yesterday. And, you know, part of it is too, like, and I had this for myself. I did, you know, I was involved in programs for other people, other teachers and whatever. And, you know, and there was always this aspect of me was like, you know, I really wanted it to go for their sake. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was a big part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I was even willing to just do it regardless of how much time and suffering I put into it, or how much whatever I put into it, so that, you know, because I would feel really good if it blew open for them, right? Like, that would take them down a better financial track, or it would take them down a better, you know, like optics for them, or whatever it was from the outside, right? Um, but that's wrong. That's the way it stagnates. That's the way it stays in one place, you know. because now you're desiring, your motivation is not, I mean, it's always an aspect of it. I mean, we wouldn't do this, you wouldn't have that same thought process for an enemy, right? You wouldn't have that same, if somebody was really, like constantly pissed you off and, you just couldn't stand to be around them, why in the hell would you try to get them to do well? You would have no vested interest in them doing well. It would just be more aggravation for you, right? And so I get that part of it, that there is that, but it's also one of those things. It's like, it should be, the overflow should be that's one of the things, is that it goes okay for them, but it's not a primary motivating factor, right? And we get trapped in that. And I think when that happens, I saw that happen so many times in my own life, where I was, they wanted me to help them with this and that, and I did, and and I did whatever I could, and I did it 100%. But one of the things was that it never really went as well as I thought it would. Or no, it never really went as well as I thought it should. And so, and I took it as almost like almost a personal slight, that it's like, how do you public not see the value in this? How do you not see the value in this person? How do you not see what, like, well, that's the wrong attitude, right? That's just, it doesn't do anything. It just sort of holds it in that place, almost, almost like a minor frustration or resentment toward the public in general. Well, if that's your carrier wave that then you're trying to build all these other things on, it's like, that's not the right carrier wave, because the carrier wave that they're sensing or hearing or whatever is that, like, you guys are stupid if you don't see how good this person is, or you don't see how good this program is,
Yeah,
or
it's kind of like
whatever.
the same idea of like you were saying before about because I think that Mother Teresa example, um, basically what your teacher was saying was not just the part that she was doing it for herself because she enjoyed it, but also that we there's a certain way of thinking about service that implies that the best service is somehow when it's something you do for other people, but it's only like a sacrifice for you, or somehow induces some level of discomfort or suffering or pain or whatever. And somehow like that martyrdom is like the highest level. And it's
Exactly.
literally the opposite. Like how, like if you're doing something for somebody else, if like I wouldn't want that. Like if I wouldn't want it, who would?
Right.
Like only somebody in a perverted state of mind, or not. I guess that's kind of judgmental to say that, but like in a way that's how it seems to me. Like only somebody in some kind of perverted mental state would want to have someone be giving them some kind of service and suffering in the process,
Right.
for like a everybody that I know would only want to be receiving from somebody that was there giving in the way that they wanted to give because they enjoyed being there giving, getting something out of it. Like otherwise you'd feel bad and guilty about it afterward, and you'd be like, yay, thank you for helping me, but now I also but also thank you for giving me this like guilty feeling that like now I feel bad for you because, and now everybody feels bad about feeling bad about feeling bad about it's just like
It's just an endless black hole,
garbage.
right?
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
black
I
hole
mean,
of like
that's right. And
negativity.
that's the thing. And it's like, and that, this, everything entrains to the highest vibration or the highest frequency in the room, right? Or the strongest, not the highest, the strongest. And so if everything is generating bad feelings all the way around, whether they're, you feel like that's bread of shame, right? Like you're doing something for somebody, but you're not getting anything back from, or you're acquiring something and then you're not sharing it, right? Like you're doing this, but then you're not including others in that. And it's like, it has to come from you first, right? Otherwise it just generates more anxiety, more frustration, more loss or lack, and all of those things, right? It's like you always have to come, where is that deep rooted why, that endless wellspring of, you know spontaneous emotion that will then be able to be sustained with everything that you do. And and that's what starts to resonate at the core, and then eventually it comes to the outside, and then it moves outward. It's an endless flow, right? When you're connected to that place, there's no way for you to drain that off,
Right.
and there's nothing that can take away from it in a negative way, right? Like it's only coming from that source, but your all your experiences are adding into that source, and so it becomes this ultimate feedback loop, right? And it's like, and everything that sort of goes from there. And I mean we're stating things that, in a different formatted way in some ways than what all of these, success gurus have said forever, right? It's like, do what you love, and then what you love, you'll be able to, you won't care if you're, getting you're getting monetary back from that, or success back from that, or whatever, because you'll have hit that thing that gives your life meaning. And if you do it long enough, the world will recognize that and will contribute back to you for that, right? Because you are what you think about most of the time. That's what we're saying. And so um but other than that, we're just saying it from, there is no difference, as above so below, right? It's like there is no difference in what we're saying as well. It's like, and everybody takes the success gurus because they're mostly concerned with your success, right? That's why they do what they do. They're saying pick those things, like if you hate real estate, you're not going to be good at it if you hate real estate, right? You can go through all the motions or whatever, but the core of you is saying like, fuck, I got to do this again. I got to make these 30 calls a day, and I got to do this. I can follow the program and do it, but the whole time you're like, I really don't want to do this. It's not enjoyable to me. It's not like, I like the end result, but the end result is only a fraction of, that's an outcropping of that frequency that you've been generating the whole time, right? So, there's no legs to it. You'll never sustain it. It'll never be there for you. And, think about anything that you've done, like, for you, it's your painting. For me, in some ways it's this, or all the things around this. I, I can't track the hours that I've put into it. And is it because I'm such a great student, or I'm such a this or such a that, or I'm just dogged at it or whatever? It's like, no, that would only go so far. Even discipline only goes so far. You have to love what you're doing and the end result of that for yourself, in order for to really hit that deep well where it's just this artesian spring that's just kind of like gushing out all over the place no matter what you do, right? And and that's really why I think that the the reciprocation in any form is a net positive for you, right? Whether it's people that get it and they, and they're doing very well with what you've given them, and they're applying it and it's making their life better. How could you think of that? Like like that's a very strong positive, right? I mean, but it's because it makes you feel good, not because, you're thinking, oh, well, I did this and that means I'm a great this or whatever. It's like, that's just secondary, right? It's like, that you really, that somebody actually picked up any little thing. I've had people uh pick up one little thing that I thought was just like inconsequential, basically, just like, oh, adjust your practice this way, do this little thing. I think that this is gonna, it sounds like from everything you've told me, this may be where the misstep is. Adjust yourself to this and try it this way and give it a good try, and then see what happens at that point. And that one little thing, which I thought was just sort of like almost like a hindsight, like just a little, literally the smallest adjustment. Even weeks later, they came back and they were like, oh my God, like, I never understood why this wasn't really producing the results that I wanted to. And I changed that one little thing. And now it's literally like, prior to that, I've been doing nothing. And that one little adjustment just made everything better. It's like, I didn't know that was going to happen. I didn't know. So we don't always know what it's going to be. But I was very happy that, that one little piece of information that I had not even thought about, and, but through their question had given them. And that was the thing, the cinch pin that just let everything unfold for them. And, um, but, and that's, it's just great, right? But it's like, it made me feel good, but it wasn't like, my thought process wasn't like, oh, I should evaluate everything they're doing and then evaluate it next to my stuff, and then evaluate, like, like figure out what's a whole different thing that they can do to get to this place, and then they're going to think I'm great, and then they're going to, I got no time for that. First of all, it's, there's just no way in hell. And at the same time, we don't know what it is that's going to trip the switch, right? We just don't know. And so, but it makes, and I was generally happy for them. Like, I mean, some of those people I've not even talked to again. Some of those people I don't know where they are in life, but I just assume that they're doing great. It's like, that's fine. That's what it's about, right? And uh so, and I just feel like I'm just doing this, and I'll do it the best that I can. I'm not perfect. I'll make mistakes. It may turn people off, it may turn people on. Either way, I just feel like this is what I do anyway, so why not? If people want it, and I'm willing to share it, and uh, take it and do with it what you will, right? I'm not here to debate what I do. It works for me, and it's worked for many others. It's not about proving what I do. It's not about, proving that, it can work for 100% of everybody that does it. It's not about that. That's up to you. I'm just laying it down, and, you guys take it up if you want and give it a whirl. If it's, if it's making your life better and it's something that you can then anchor your life in, by all means, I'm happy that you're succeeding, in whatever aspect, all of them, hopefully, in the balance that you want. It has nothing to do with me. I don't care what you do with it. I don't care, what your specifics are. You're the only one that needs that. I don't need that. I'm happy that, I'm able to articulate it in a way that you can, and then, but it's up to you to utilize it. I can't go to the gym for you. you know That'd be a business. It's like, if you had people that could just go to the gym for you, and you get healthier better muscle structure, whatever, by, better wind, by, by having somebody else run for you or do this or do that. Um, so far we can't. So, it's like you have to do it, right? But it's like that's that's it. I don't base my success on, you know, changing, making it like I'm not successful if I don't change people's lives. That has no bearing, or very, very little, right? It just, but every time I do, or every time it does, I feel happy. But I feel happy that it makes me feel good that I'm able to give somebody some advice or some teaching that will help them get what they want in life. Not what I want them to get, what they want. And so, that's the
Yeah, but that's
primary
the
thing.
thing too. It's like one of the things that I have always admired about you is like the freedom with which you say what you think. And I think that part of that comes from not being attached to the effect that it has on somebody else. Like it's not like you micromanage and you're like, okay, I need to figure out like exactly what's going on. It's like it's not like people come to you or come into your, your treatment, office and you're like, okay, let's let's get every detail of everything that's going on so we can like really get this right and like and all it's like micromanaging the process to to ensure the perfect outcome. That's like like that's the thing. It's like I think you the end result of or not no, knowledge and action are the same thing, right? It's like belief and action are the same thing. So like you really demonstrate that you understand that everything entrains to the strongest vibration. So you don't like you when I've ever come to you and like had a problem and I was like trying to figure something out or is really in the shit, you never focus that much on the problem.
Why would I feed the problem energy?
Right. And it's like it's so I think that's one of the things that's so that I enjoy and appreciate so much about our relationship and the time that I spend with you is because like it's such a relief to not focus on the problem so much and um to entrain to the space where that problem doesn't exist, only the solution exists. And um and uh and the more that I do the things that I've learned from you, the more I feel like I'm able to entrain to that and make that more my natural environment. And that's a really cool thing. um but yeah, it's the same way that you deal with your acupuncture patients. People come in and they say, you know, oh, I've got, because I know I've been in your treatment room and I've gone to you for stuff and that's always been a really positive experience. But the core, the essence of the experience of being your patient in an acupuncture um, situation is like I walk in, I say, I'm thinking about the way that I'm feeling and the thing that's going on with me as being um, painful, and I don't know what to do about it. And there's a part of my mind that thinks there's no way that this can get better, or I don't know what to do to make this better, or like all I'm focused on is like the discomfort of this and the potential seriousness of this. And the essence of what you bring to that situation is always like, it's not, oh, that's no problem. Oh, that's no problem. It's not, not like you're dismissing the way that you're not dismissing the way that people feel about it, but you're dismissing the fixed nature of the problem, you know, and, and I feel like you bring that to like, you know, everything that we do. And I don't know, that's that like flexibility of mind that I think that the practices that we do cultivate, maybe in some ways, not maybe more than anything, but at least like that's one of the things that stands out to me the most strongly.
I I think you're right. That's, and I was always trained that, holding your mind in the end result and that unity, speaking what you think and then acting on those thoughts or those words, then will has the potential to bring about the best result you could possibly get. And so um and again, we come back to the basics, right? It's like, what do you want? Why do you want it? And then who are you? Right? Know thyself. It's like all of those factors, those three factors have to be in balance in some ways to support each other, right? So otherwise you're already, any one of those things that's missing, you're in a sea of gray, right? It's like you're just in this place where it's like, well, you give out this amorphous kind of information. Why are you expecting a specific answer back? You're in this cloud. It hasn't differentiated yet. You can't say what you want clearly. You don't know where, if you can say what you want, do you know where that's coming from? Really deeply, where is that coming from? What's the motivation factor? What's the place that you can get to where that's such a, that's not something you have to conjure up. It's something that, when you hit that core, it's like there's a spontaneous, visceral emotional sensation that goes through your body. That's that energy moving, right? That's the core of what it is. And it doesn't always have to be a positive, right? It could be, I mean, there have been plenty of things that I've found in myself that when I asked that why and just was relentless about asking why, like a little kid. They're looking for the end, they're looking for the primary causative factor. They don't put it in those ways, but that's what they're looking for. They want to see where the start was. Where's the primary? Where's the big bang of this thing that's causing all this to happen, right? And so, and when we hit that, I mean, it's not always positive sometimes, but it's always, revelatory, right? It's like there's this revelation that comes to you that's like, holy crap. I remember the first time that I did that, and I hit that, and it was like, as soon as I hit that, I like, when I wrote it out and I just read it back to myself, I was like, holy shit, this has driven a significant portion of my life in significant territories. And I thought, and it wasn't positive, to my way of thinking. And I was like, but having that deep understanding of it, it was just like this overwhelming, explosion of stuff that had been so bound up. And I was trying to pick at it, pick this thread off and pick that thread off, and maybe it's this and maybe it's that, or, oh, I'm not doing this, I'm not doing that. It's like, but it's like having that all slough off to see the core of it, and to see how that, there was no effort on my part to see how that drove my life in all of those four territories for so long, that it was an amazing release. And that's when everything started to shift. It's like, because then, you're, once you realize what that is, and it became kind of a belief that you expanded on, but it was a false belief, right? Because, when you realize it, at least in that negative aspect, when you realize that that's what it is, it's like, it doesn't hold any water anymore, right? It's like, it's just a sieve now. It's like, oh, but you can't leave this nature abhors a vacuum, right? So you can't just like eradicate a belief, right? You have to replace it with something that is true to you, right? It's something that you can expand on, and you can see that once you've implemented that and you experience life in those situations, and from that source, that it, the results that you get are consistent, and they keep producing. No matter what you do, they keep producing. And so it's like, okay, I took it from this, negative source, let's say, or I've labeled as a negative thing, and it got me through all of these territories and motivated me in these ways, but it was like a false motivation, right? At a certain point, it only could go so far. I'm not saying that any of those, any negative thing has a lot of energy to expel, right? And so you can use that to drive yourself forward for a while, but it will eventually peter out, and then it'll be like you'll be left empty because
Yeah.
it can't go any further.
Yeah. I
And
think
so
that's
now you're
basically what
wondering,
happened.
what the hell?
Yeah.
How come that's not working anymore? Or why I've achieved this thing, and why do I still feel like shit? Or why do I still feel empty, or I'm not fulfilled, or whatever? It's like, that's because that's a clear indicator that, you know, the belief that was at the core of that is not something that will sustain through everything else, right? It'll only motivate you so far, and then it's tapped. We're done. The well is dry. Can't go any farther. So, you have to look at those things. I'd rather, from that point in my life, I put a ton of uh, 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 effort and time into always evaluating what I was doing through those methods, right? Like, what do you want specifically in any territory, in even any sub territory of those major territories? It's like, specifically, what do you want? What does it look like to you, right? And then, why do you want that? How do you balance need and want? How do is it, like, you need to dive deeply into that source. Is it tapping a wellspring that's endless, or is it something that's going to only motivate you for a certain amount of time, and struggle at that, right? Because now when it's not something that when it's not this free flowing artesian well, right, that's coming up just from you tapping on it, that it's that it's something you have to draw from. Eventually that draw is going to be reduced, right? So it's going to dry up, and because you're having to spend energy on drawing it up, it makes what you do more conflict oriented, because that's just the nature of it. When it's something that's just like, you stuck a pipe in it. I mean, an artesian well, for people that are living in the city, if you don't know what that is, it means that when you tap, a well, normally you have to put a pump in there to draw the water up, right, and get it to go into your house or whatever. If you tap and you hit an artesian well, it means the pressure in that water source is so great that it's actually making the water flow out without any assistance. That's what a spring is, right, in nature. The difference between, like, a pool of water and a spring, right, is that the spring is constantly being fed automatically from the ground, right? It's like the pressure, whatever it's tapped into, is constantly giving you this, and it's usually the most, the most fresh water that you can get, right? It's like everybody wants spring water, but nobody really thinks about what spring water is, right? It's not water that's typically produced from a well. It's water that you've tapped into that source and it's coming out automatically, right? There's nothing that you have to do. So you're looking for those springs, that are endless, that will never, and that's when that everything that you produce, first of all, there'll be less effort, not no effort, but less effort than conflict, right? It'll be like, it's being produced anyway. Now, what do I use this for? Oh, it's like, oh, okay. It's like, I'm using it for this. And it's like, oh, look, I have more and I'm going to use it for this. And oh, look, I have more. And, there's not all of this, like, I've got to drill myself to go and pull more of this source stuff out. And, it doesn't work like that. So that's, the biggest difference. And then, who are you at that moment? I mean, we're constantly changing, especially in this territory, but really in everything. Your relationships change you, your success or lack of changes you, right? Your health changes you, right? Everything changes you. And so, you're never the same person for any length of time. Every experience you have changes you for better or for worse. So, you need to know, and when things get whether things get great or things get horrible, you need to know that the only person that, your only point of reference is you. Because whether it's something that you've produced that's great, it's still unknown to you because you haven't had it that long, right? It's unknown how that's going to change you. You're in the unknown. Everybody thinks of the unknown as being all negative. Well, it's not, but you dip into a negative situation. Well, that's unknown too. So if you're in the unknown, if somebody, just imagine this, I'm just copying something that was told to me and it just struck me as being, it was a very visceral sensation. He'd say, like, imagine yourself in our conversation right now, that everything disappears. Like, you have no visual reference. Everything is black, completely black. No light through your eyelids, nothing, completely black. There's no floor under you. You're weightless. You're floating in space, whatever your orientation is. There's no sound. There's no smell. There's no taste. There's no tactile sensation. Nothing. You're completely in the void. A void. Like, what do you do after your panic is to the point where it's like you can't express panic anymore, right? What would you do? Well, you either relax on your own volition, or through expelling so much energy in your panic, you give up, right? You surrender to it. So you're in this void, you relax one way or the other, you're going to get to that. So, and then you're looking for a point of reference, right? Whether it's like you're speaking, but no sound's coming out, or you're listening and you can't hear anything, you're really focusing on each of your sensory apparatus externally first, of course, right? Like, to see if you can get a point of reference. So imagine, that in any scenario, and then, like, well, your only point of reference at that point, in that most extreme ideation of that, is yourself, right? I mean, how do you, if you don't know yourself, you are completely lost. You don't know what to do next. You don't know whether to, reach out with a visual sense or an auditory sense, or, or go internally, like who, how are you going to respond to that? even thinking of the difference between like being in a completely black space or a completely white space, right? Those two things alone will change your perspective on that, right? I mean, we're talking about a really, abstract idea here, but the idea is that if you don't know yourself, then you don't have the first clue of what is the next thing that you can do to find your way back to the known. It's that simple. So, and if we're changing all the time, does that mean that, once we know who we are, we can just let that go? It's like, no, because every day you're changing, every experience changes you. So, those three things are primary for, like anything that we do, but definitely in these areas where you're saying everything is mind, the universe is mind, consciousness is mind, the one is mind, right? It's like that. It's our consciousness is, our consciousness is that aspect in which everything is, right? And even our connections with the one in any aspect. So if we're saying that, but we don't know where we are, why would you think you'd be going in any direction that you want? And it's, and in my way of thinking, if I want to extend that and take it out to the worst extreme, which is my tendency, it's like, imagine having the thought, because this is what paralyzes people in life, right? Imagine the thought, then the only thought that gets introduced to you, especially if you don't know who you are, or don't know yourself, the next thing that you do could end your existence. Well, you'd be paralyzed into doing nothing, right? If you thought that any little thing that you did would result in your lack of existence, then you'd be completely out of your mind with like worry and anxiety and stress and whatever, thinking that like, if I don't take the most appropriate step next, I'm going to die. Well, now you see this condition with, 98% of the population of this planet, so it's not just, people who are trying to follow a spiritual path or anything else. It's like when you make every little thing, every next thing is going to be a life or death situation. Well, that can either clear your mind or it can freeze you into, stagnation, right? You don't do anything because you're too afraid that anything you do will end up in the worst possible result. And isn't it funny that all the people that most people, let's say, idealize, regardless of what territory, they'll tell you that, that the one thing that I see that's sort of generic in all of them is that they courageously move forward, not in a haphazard way. They evaluate the situation, they know who they are, and they're making adjustments to themselves, or they're taking action in some way to produce a different location for them than where they are at that moment, right? Nobody has look. I've said this for it's like I hated this. I get the idea, but it's just like I think words are very important. So it's like I kind of like in some ways hated this idea of like follow your bliss. That was like a big meme for a while, right? So um and I get the idea behind it, but it's kind of like, who would move from a blissful state? In some ways that bliss is they're thinking of it as like, like nirvana or, utopia or heaven or whatever, right? That it's just this sort of, if I can get here, and occupy that space, then everything will be okay. Well, if that's the case, and that's what we're identifying as bliss or heaven or whatever, it's like, isn't that just another point of stagnation? Because who would move from that? It's the opposite of the last thing that we talked about with the, you have no point of reference, right? It's like, why would you move? Why would you try to progress or evolve or do anything else if you were in a completely blissed out state? Nobody would. You'd be insane to do
Yeah.
that until
I
it
mean, I think,
became so commonplace that you got bored, and now you'd rather risk not being in that state just so that you can have some novelty in your life and sort of move that evolutionary needle forward, right?
mm,
So
yeah, I mean, I think the follow your bliss thing was just basically what we were saying earlier about doing what you enjoy doing, or doing what you love doing, or like following that wellspring instead of, being conflicted about why you're doing the things that you're doing. But I can appreciate your interpretation of the idea of bliss being like a point of stagnation, or like that, that teaching that you come back to on a regular basis, because, I think that is really valuable. And the other thing is, it's funny. It's like one of the things that's really interesting to me about teaching in any capacity is like when you said, I mean, I can't even tell you how many times you've talked about that to me, like that, you would never move from a place of bliss or perfection. And if you think that there's going to be an end point where everything's resolved and everything's perfect and there's no more movement, or there's no more whatever, like you've arrived, like if you're projecting that out into the future, you're basically screwed already, because, you know um that doesn't exist. It always just keeps going. I feel like every time you said that to me, it was a relief and a reminder. But I think the interesting thing about any any teaching like that is that it's like it still doesn't remove somebody's process of coming to understand that experientially. And
right.
so, and the nice thing about hearing things like that over and over again isn't that like someone else can make you really understand the core of that, but that it's somewhere in your mind, so that when you get to the point where you've real where the idea of thinking and feeling that there is going to be a spot like that, when that finally collapses, there'll be a comfort in like, no, then really being like, oh, now I really understand what he was saying, or now I really understand that, like, um it won't be such a shock, you know.
Yeah, because the whole thing is that I'm not saying that it's not a good thing to try to go after. I'm
Yeah.
just saying that you should put it in the right, you should have the right expectation about that. For me, bliss is nothing more than a plateau that you can rest at for a little bit of time. We don't know how long, right? But that any time that I've gotten to those places, I'm in, can I hold these two things at the same time? Can I enjoy what I've done and receive the gifts that presents me and be good in that place at the same time, already evaluating what am I going to do now? What's the next step? Where am I going to go from here? It's like you can hold both of those things. It's not you know, thinking about what can I do next is not a renunciation of the place that you've already gotten to, right? And enjoying that, whatever it is, right? It's like, um, it those two things aren't mutually exclusive, right? It's like it's just part of the process. Knowing that you're always in the process is like, it gives your head the right attitude, right? It's like,
I think again, it's like the response that like what you're talking about right now, that being in the right attitude, the physiological response of that is relaxation. Like it, like for me anyway, it's like, and that's what it is. It's like every time you, it's funny. It's just funny that like the things that you have taught me like that, when you when you say them, it's like it's just I'm just it's just funny that there's a correlation there between like the information that you deliver and like the way that like, oh, I say, oh, okay, like that helps me to understand things in a better way or go after my goals in a way that is going to be like better for me, or like whatever. It's like there's a teaching there, but the physiological response of even hearing those words and knowing that they're true in the core of you, the physiological response is some relaxation.
yeah,
It's
it's an
just so funny how
unwinding,
all that
right?
stuff ties together.
Right?
Like,
I mean, those are the key, those are the key things. And it's like, I swear that, part of um, going through these practices, understanding them, putting your mind into it, putting your words into it, your thoughts, words, and deeds, practicing the aspects of it, and then building that together. It's a constant unfolding, right? And unfold, this unfolding is the opposite of clenching and holding on to what you have, right? It's like, this is tense, this is force. And how friggin' long can you do this, before you cramp or before you have to let go? Like, I don't care how scared you are hanging on to a rope, 2,000 feet in the air. Your panic, your fear is going to be so high that you're going to be like, some kind of, I don't know, monkey that can just hang on forever. It's like, no, eventually your muscles are going to give out and you're going to fall. You can't, right? So it's like, and we're doing that with almost every little aspect in our lives.
yeah.
And what do you think happens? Eventually, you're going to get tired. Emotionally, physically, mentally, you're going to be fatigued to the point that you have an automatic release. That's that thing, right? And then, oh God, now you're in the unknown again, and you don't know who you are. You have no point of reference. So what the fuck? I'm like, this is what we're trying to give, people a different thought process about that, a different sort of container to hold this in, and different ways to experience it. So, and they all compound, right? They compound to each other. Are you holding the success you have so tightly that you can't have more? In order to get more, you got to open your hand, right? You got to relax. I mean, that's the thing, right? So, are you holding the relationship that you have in the form that it is so tightly because you're so friggin' scared that you're going to lose it, that you can't relax it a bit to be more? Are you so paranoid about your health in every little aspect? It's like, I mean, I would say out of all the territories, probably because I'm in that industry, but of all the territories, that's the one that I get bombarded with the most, right? Like, these foods are bad, and these foods are bad, and these fertilizers are bad, and the ocean's dying, and you can't eat the fish more than once a week, or you'll get mercury poisoning, and you get, it's like you become this paranoid person that doesn't want to eat anything, and yet you have to eat. You've come to this place where it's like, everything that I do, it's like,
Yeah, 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 yeah,
imagine you
yeah.
have to eat. and you eat something that you know is not good for you. Well, you've just put yourself in a fucking bind that is going to, that like is wearing away at you, right? I don't want to eat it because I know it's bad, but I have to eat something because I'm starving, and I eat it, or that's all that's available. Do I just not? I mean, anybody can not eat for, a day or whatever. But if it goes on longer, right, you have to eat it. That's what's available. That's what you can afford, whatever the circumstances. Do you then say, are you saying, oh, this stuff is killing me, and you're still pounding it? Like, this is poison. Let me eat some more of that. Okay. Or on the other hand, are you saying, like, thank God somebody made this stuff in a can that has been preserved and can stay like that for a while. I know it's not the best, but for right now, this will give me enough nourishment to change my scenario as time goes on, right? Little by little. And it starts becoming this thing where it's like, is the majority of what you do in that positive zone? And, can you enjoy a little bit of this stuff that maybe isn't the best for you, but it's not your baseline? So is that really going to take away from your baseline? That's just bad thinking. It's bad thinking that having, I'm going to use a really awful example, but having a small bag of Doritos is going to negate the 3 months of salad that you ate. Organic salad, whatever you want to, whatever, right? It's like, that's just stupid thinking, right? It's like you've built up this momentum, and that's what we're talking about, right? It's like in all of these territories, it's not like we're going to say some magic words and ping, everything's going to be perfect, right? It's like you go through this process, and that you're building up, and you know the energetic momentum that you've gained is being then, you're transitioning that into something else. That momentum is being applied to something else, or something in the same territory, but now you have more of it to give. And that's going to start that other feedback loop, right? Look, it's really, you hear these extremes, and they are extremes, but, in their extreme, they, I think sometimes the extremes bring it home in a way that, common stuff doesn't always. Like, I remember listening to a podcast with this guy who, I think he was from like Southeast Asia, somewhere around there, and he was really very wealthy, and he had a bunch of factories and a bunch of people working for him. He's doing extremely well, like really, like on anybody's scale, extremely well. And somebody had said to him, "Oh, I heard you had oh, I'm sorry, I heard you had an accident and one of your factories burned down or whatever." And the guy was just like, "Oh yeah, yeah. Oh God, that was horrible." Oh, but he was laughing about it at the same time, because you know, when you're looking at it he was looking at it from like, yeah, this happened, but isn't it great that I had all these other things that were great, that I could utilize them to rebuild and do, and get this back up and running again, and get these people back to work, and do whatever I needed to do to get that done. Yes, the event is horrible. We're not saying that it wasn't horrible, but at the same time, in the perspective of everything that this person had acquired in his life, it was tragic, but at the same time, on a level of, that was like, oh, things happen, and, we can either, lament about that and cry about that little bit of, income stream that's going away, or, let's shift these people, and that's what he did, is, he shifted the people that were working there to another place so that they could continue and be okay, and all of that. It wasn't like anybody got left out of the configuration, until he could rebuild it and get that back and running. And he was like, and then in the end, when he did that, he made it even better than it was. Right. So he was able to innovate and make it better, take that opportunity to build something even stronger. And but it's just the attitude, it's like, how, that must have cost millions and millions of dollars in loss for that. And he was like, yeah, it was really horrible. Oh god, it wasn't like, whoa, I'm crushed now, it's like, nobody believes that you're crushed now, and you don't even believe that you're crushed now. That's why you're saying it like that. That's why you're kind of like going, yeah, bad shit happens. Okay, nobody's fault. It's just, it is what it is. And we're going to use the momentum that I have, thank God, to, and my attitude of like, okay, we're going to fix this, and we're going to make it even stronger than it was before, and even better than it was before. And, who knows, maybe in the end, it will have really turned out to be a good thing, so it's, uh, it's just part of that, right? It's like a lot of it is attitude, but it's an easier attitude to have when you can see those results consistently, right? So um yeah, in the beginning, it's a bit of a leap of faith. Sure it is. No matter how much you want to believe it, it's still a bit of a leap of faith,
What's a
right?
leap of faith?
Like in our case, like saying, um, you've heard me say this a lot of times. It's like, no matter what, no matter what I had for success or health or relationship or whatever, that the thing that was my primary go-to in good times and in bad was my spiritual practice. That was the thing that anchored me into everything. And when bad things happened, I just doubled down on my spiritual practice. It's like I doubled down on the thing that was the well source that would, let everything else in my life grow where I wanted it to be, or beyond where I wanted it to be. So that's the thing. It's like, but that's, you know, for all those people that are like disillusioned about, like, I'm doing, like everybody kind of smashes the American dream now, right? Work really hard, get in a good company, work your way up, get as high as you can, and retire, everything's fulfilling, you retire with the gold watch and blah, blah, blah. It's nobody could say that in every case that's how it works anymore, right? It's like, it hasn't worked like that since the 50s, so it's like, and it's gotten worse every decade since, as far as that goes. So, you know, um, you need to, you need to find that source within yourself that's gonna, um, if your success could translate into all these other things and sustain them, then good for you, right? It's like, that's okay. But if it's, for me, it was always the spiritual practice that, that grounded me and at the same time expanded me so that I could keep things in my mind relative to what was going on in the other areas of my life. And um and for me, that was the source that never lacked. You know, it just didn't. It's always had more than I could possibly utilize. So